Motivation. I'm Lori Joy Kingwell.
And I'm Chrissy Van. We're two dreamers on two wheels inspired by our community.
And celebrating the voices we're just lucky enough to discover along the ride. So if not already, like, subscribe, follow along, do what you gotta do to not miss an episode. Burnouts. On a motorcycle, it's a stunt where a rider quickly spins the back tire, burning the rubber, creating a smoke show. Keep it going for too long while real damage takes place. Because that tire, you need it for actual riding. It needs that grip to keep you upright on the road. You burn too much of that off, well, your next ride, you're going down. And like that back tire, you hold that throttle of your life too hard for too long during life's stressors and pressures, you won't be riding upright for much longer. Burnout in our lives can cause us an insane amount of wear and tear to our physical and mental well-being. And oftentimes we're missing the signs that real deal burnout has not only taken place, but the consequences are about to affect us in a big way around the next turn. So today's episode's called Banishing Burnout. We're talking about different types of burnout, how they impact our health, how they impact our lives, how to catch the signs before it gets to that stage, and what to do if you're already there. This is your motivation.
Catching the signs. How beneficial that would have been for myself a little while ago. We are talking banishing burnout, and like many of our podcasts, Lori and I really dive into our own lived experience. I think that's what allows us to have a stronger connection with all of you and those little messages that mean so much when we hear from you listeners. And this is a really big one that I think both Lori and I have experienced or been experiencing in two different facets of life, from personal life impacting things to lead to burnout, or from work life to lead to burnout. And the reason why I think both of us are excited to address this topic is because we're in a time in the world that I think we're seeing many people reach this burnout stage. And it's because it comes from stress. And I think it's fair to say for the last couple of years, whether we realize or are aware of it or not, no matter how the pandemic has impacted your life personally, going through this experience, even if you're used to all the protocols and restrictions now, there's a base layer of stress in all of our lives. We're not able to operate in the optimal way that we've always known to be through, well, most of my life, I know for sure, and we're going over 3 decades here. But when it comes to burnout, this is one of the interesting things as Lori and I was prepping and talking with my circle of friends. I reached the point where I'm actually feeling the physical and mental effects of burnout. But when I say that term, I would say in all my life, and especially up in recent times, because I think we're hearing it thrown around more and more, I actually had no idea what it meant. I thought it was just some buzzy word for saying I'm really tired and it's been a lot. And I'm frustrated that I misunderstood this term so much because now I am living it. Now, for my personal experience, it's coming from an over workload. But the thing that is interesting is I've actually lived through 2 different types of burnout in this pandemic period. Like many people, when March 2020 hit, my entire work life shifted. Now we know many people were out of work completely. Other people, their working lives changed immensely. Some of their duties being pared back in a big way because companies, or maybe you're running your own, you didn't know how to operate. We were all familiarizing ourselves with what to do when the entire world pressed pause. So the type of burnout that I was experiencing then is called under challenge burnout. Because I was in a scenario with my role, they didn't really know what to do with me. And as a result, my workload was greatly reduced and I didn't exactly feel appreciated. I was trying to figure out where I fit in. I was bored. There weren't any learning opportunities. And somebody that views themselves as a self-starter and highly motivated, I kind of hit that wall because the days were becoming so repetitive. And at the end of the day, I felt myself getting cynical and disengaged. Now, on the flip side, as the world started turning faster and faster, I actually had a bit of a breakdown about a week and a half ago, a very public one, which, as you've gotten to know me, is upsetting on many accounts, because as much as I preach vulnerability, I loathe doing it in areas where I'm not very familiar with the people. But this was a very public, breakdown in front of my colleagues. And the reason why this happened, and I know Lori will say it, is because Chrissy, yeah, that's me, forgot to lift the valve again. And I was holding on to all this stress to the point that it bubbled over into this meltdown moment, which essentially was just bursting into frustrated tears in front of my colleagues. This was caused by frenetic burnout. And so this is what happens when you are the type that maybe searches ever more frantically for success. You're willing to put your ambition first and you just start going. And what happens in the world today when companies are looking for their individuals to be more and more efficient, carry more responsibilities? We know that many companies have done mass layoffs, which means staff is skeletal, but the responsibilities remain the same. Well, if you're an ambitious person, you start off in that honeymoon phase thinking, I can do it. This is fine. But when you keep working at that pace, you may not realize that you're under the steady level of chronic stress. And eventually you're going to reach the point that you're going to start having mental and physical impacts of that, to the point you break down, to the point that you are burnt out. So we're talking frenetic, we're talking under challenge. Neglect is another pillar that I know psychologically they talk about as well, where people just generally, it's a subtype, feel helpless at work. They don't really have the ability to keep up with the demands in their job. They're unmotivated. So there's a lot of facets that I think all of us have experienced in both our personal and our career lives as well. And the underlying theme is there's all this shit that's going on that would happen in our lives anyways. And we've slapped a pandemic on top of it. So I think we've doubled down to get to this point. And Lori, I know I kind of took a big leap off the hop here, but I think it just shows why one of the number one things I'm happy to do is talk about this, because when we struggle mentally, it is so important to reach out to your community and talk. Because the minute you're aware, it's like a light bulb has gone on. I know it has gone for me, where I'm reflecting on my behaviors, my cynicism, my negativity, my complaining, going to that loop that we've talked about in previous episodes. And it's that reminder that hole is not where you want to live, but it takes that work to dig yourself out of it.
And stress in and itself isn't necessarily a negative thing. It's a part of, the structure of us to keep us safe, to make us take action in our lives, to say something, move here, go here. But when it's that constant, consistent, overwhelming stressors, that there's kind of the no end to, almost this feeling of it just never stops. I can't keep up. I'm not, you're running on fumes at this point, but the workload or the whatever's happening at home, especially for parents, especially for working parents. And it just keeps coming and coming and coming. And you get to that state where you actually start, your body, your nervous system, everything starts to shut down or starts to go a little bit of haywire, because you're not actually taking any action that is completing the cycle of the stress. Like back in the day, right? You had the stressors kick up because you saw a lion and you didn't want to die from the lion. So it told you to run, and then you ran, and then you escaped the lion, or you died. But if you escaped the lion, it completed itself. The task was done at hand. But now we live in a world, especially with, the internet, especially with, the glamorization of being busy sort of thing, and just keeping going, is that we never really complete these stressors. We never really get to the other side of them. We either have a continuation of the same stressors, whether that's running to, get to this activity, whether it's, a job sort of thing, like you said, where it just is constant impacting, where you can't keep up, and or you're bored, or you don't have anything to push you forward. But it's that lack of the cycle that our nervous system never gets to complete. So it's always in this really heightened state of a stress that isn't healthy, because you're not able to take enough action to complete it, or to say to the body, you're safe now, you're okay, you can relax now, or you can move on to the next task at hand. And I don't know if I'm explaining that correctly, but in itself, we're at a time, like you said, especially with the pandemic, more than ever, we no longer at a place where this is just everyday stressors, and life can be a little tricky and hard. Yeah, life is hard. Like the tough stuff of life doesn't end, until you're no longer here on this earth. But the level at which we're taking on our day-to-day tasks, our day-to-day stressors, we are burning out, and health issues are because of them. A disconnect from family and friends are taking place because we kind of turtle into ourselves at times, or you're just so emotionally exhausted that everything around you is triggering you. Like you said, you become more pessimistic, you become more negative about things. Everything starts to, I always know when I'm on my outward environment, I'm always very aware of when I am creeping in on actual burnout, is my environment becomes very chaotic. I'm an organized, neat person. I didn't used to be, because I was always on a state of burnout. But now I know how to kind of rein it in as much as possible. But that's one of my telltale signs of like, you need to get real aware of the pace at which you're clicking along at. Is my home. There'll be dishes and shits everywhere and it's chaotic. And that for me personally is one of my signs where it's like, you have got to be proactive of like, where can you shave some things off? What are you worrying about that you have no control over, or what can go sidelined right now? Or what stressor can you come to a completion with or make peace with, sort of thing?
So many of these things, I'm like, yep. Because that awareness, that early awareness is so, so key. And I think it's interesting in my experience why I was so blinded to it for so long. The one word that you used, which I actually would love, the episode's called Banishing Burnout, but I would love to banish the word busy. And it was almost like I got addicted to the word busy, but in this gradual way where I was like, oh, it's just really busy right now, but it will get better when. It will get better when. And exactly that. I was just staying in this heightened stress level, but that level of heightened was becoming the new baseline, which was unsustainable.
Mm-hmm.
But I was not cluing in to any of the early warning signs until that negative seed all of a sudden was planted. And we talk about so much here about how we communicate. What you think in the mind is your reality. And I would say, particularly in the last 2 weeks, I was never faced with that more. All of a sudden, what I feel is a relatively trained brain, I was having to work 10 times harder to take myself out of these negative thought cycles. And I love how you're talking about stress. It basically, obviously, yes, stress is part of our everyday life for a reason. When it gets off balanced and it doesn't push through the cycle, it's like it's stuck inside of you. And I had such an anxiety. I actually did a psilocybin microdose on the weekend. And it was really interesting to me. And I will do an episode about this one day, because trust me, I never thought this was something I would ever try in my life, even a couple of years ago. But my little miniature journey was so fascinating to me, because I swear to God, I could actually feel, I basically took it, I put on some piano music, I got in my bed, I closed my eyes with a cover and just meditated. And then instead of going to that completely even flow state of mind, my mind did end up focused and concentrated, but it was like I could feel all that stress and anxiety in a ball that was stuck in my gut. Like I swear I could physically feel it. And then I had to really look at it, and I had to really look at myself. And I was starting to reflect at all these conversations I've been having with my friends for weeks that was talking about this building and complaining. And can you believe I'm so busy? And it was like I had to look at all of that to push it out of my body. And I literally got up after in my kitchen and just started putting different music on and letting it flow and move and release out of me as much as I could, because that is how bundled it was. But those physical symptoms are real before you get to that point. Chronic headaches. Luckily, I haven't gotten horribly ill, but I know a lot of people would get sick quite often, the ones where all of a sudden you have a cold again. I mean, I know, Lori, when you were going through a really stressful period with a loved one of yours that I know you've taken on such a strong caregiver role, there was a while there, all of a sudden, every time you're working with the children that you do daily, you're catching all their bugs all the time. And it's because our bodies, if we're not going to let it out emotionally, it's going to come out physically one way or another.
When you talk about that ball of energy, or that yeah, well, you didn't say ball of energy, but that's quite literally what it is, because when you have stresses or you have emotion, it's energy in motion. And if you don't go through the whole cycle of whatever the stressors are, you don't come to a completion, that energy is still within you. And a stressing energy is very different, has a very different makeup than a joyful energy. It's energy all the same, but if it's not moving through, and we talk about why, you suddenly get triggered more easy, or you're more negative, or all those things, that energy is sitting within you. And the only way to get that energy out, one of the only ways, is to actually move it out. Thus why when you made that mind body connection enough to know, I need to move, that listening, you listened and you could feel it, within you. And it's one of the things that, I work with a little boy with autism, and he only has so many words, and he's not able to communicate his needs. And we've been together for a year. And one of the biggest roles of mine is to just pay insane attention to his physical energy. And I, at this point, can almost tell immediately when he needs to move. And we call it body breaks. And I'm like, hey, man, it looks like you need to move your body. And we go jump and we go run and we do some climbing and we get our bodies moving. And it's one of the biggest things that I've learned for myself. And it wasn't just because of this little guy that I understood it. It was going down, the rabbit hole of understanding emotions and understanding our bodies and how those, align. And so one of the biggest things that I utilize, because I get these, I need really big and a lot of times aggressive movements to get that energy out of my system. And so when before I'm even come to a place where I'm on the cusp of burnout, or I'm on the cusp of that energy being really causing some issues, soon as I feel it bubbling and boiling in any capacity, I actually carve out time to go and scream in the forest is a big one for me. So a scream in a field, I've done that when I was in Saskatchewan, going through when we lost my father-in-law, and, moving through some big emotions, and I had to get through that energy of it all. Another one I do right at home is I beat the crap out of my bed. I just pound my fist on the pillows or thing. I made an accident, or not an accident. I made the mistake years ago of hitting the back of a couch, and I just about broke my hand. So I would just be, and that was when I had left it to the point of where I was it was erupting out of me. The tire blew. I held that throttle too long, and I didn't think it through. But I needed to just release it. Because again, we watch children and they scream and they yell and they go through all these different things, and we tell them, you can't do that. You can't do that. Well, there's a reason that's needing to erupt when they're having these big feelings, or there's a lot going on, or they can't communicate or articulate how they're feeling, but they need to move it through their body. But we can't do it at others. That's the key. It's not okay to come at somebody else. It's not okay to take your shit out on everybody else or your stressors. And that's what we end up doing, because we don't allow ourselves to release it in safe spaces. And we don't allow ourselves to get nitty and gritty with it, because we have so much shame wrapped around the fact that we have those feelings. When you're just like, I could just punch someone, and then you're like, oh, how immature of me. No, that's just energy that needs to be released. And you're just associating it with that person because they've triggered you. Go take it out on the bed. You'll feel the difference. I guarantee.
Well, and then you lead into such a good point, because that's exactly it. When you've all of a sudden reached that point of burnout, you do start to get triggered way more often. All of a sudden, it's like everything feels like an attack because you're overwhelmed. You have that negative attitude. You don't even recognize it in the moment. And all of a sudden, it's exactly what we talked about in our episode about cager coexistence and toxicity.
Mm-hmm.
You can quickly become that negative virus that all of a sudden starts to spread around your home life, your work life, wherever it is. When you're burnt out, all of a sudden you're not the fun person to be around anymore. And it is because all of that is stuck inside of you and not being released. So the thing is once you realize you've reached this point, because the number one step is awareness, what do we do about it? Well, number one, communicate. That's the first step. Once I realized where I was at, the amount of weight that came off the minute I was able to verbalize where I was at with colleagues, just had an honest conversation. It's 2021. If you cannot have an honest conversation about your mental health with your colleagues or within your workplace or within your family, like there's more work to be done, but we need to vocalize our mental health because I think for a lot of people, it's highly jeopardized right now. We're in a difficult season where everyone is busier. People are missing loved ones. There's so much emotion going on. We need to be there. And communicating with your friends and family. They may have been the ones that saw it coming, that heard you complaining and are thinking, oh, dear God, are they going to talk to me about X and Y again? Not because they don't want to be there for you, but because it's hard to be around an individual that's stuck in that negative thought pattern. But the experience when you verbalize with them, I've observed this of myself. This is where I'm at, and I want to get better and heal this. Oh my gosh, it is night and day. And I'll be surprised if you are in this boat and you decide to go that avenue that you don't receive support in some capacity, because what I've received from people I care about has been beyond. I mean, people can either relate to what you're going through or don't want to see you in that state because they know it's out of character. Generally, if you're experiencing that level of stress and things are coming out of you like cynicism and negativity, they're going to recognize that that's not within your character of a human being and going to want to help put you on the right path. The next thing, as well as getting back to basics, because from my experience, I started to notice all of a sudden all the pillars of what I highly value in regards to my own self-care, primarily being working out, which, as Lori talked about, one of the main benefits and ways to avoid burnout is working through your stress cycles and getting that energy and motion out. Exercise is one of the most proven and effective ways to do so.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, my gym trips, less and less, so hard to get to, not as effective, not moving, but you have to force yourself to get back to basics. Same with even your own personal hygiene. I texted one friend the other week and I was like, yeah, I didn't wash my hair in 5 days. We were going somewhere. I'm like, I'm going to do everyone a favor and actually shower my body. But it's getting back to your basics and your foundation, even when you don't feel like it. Because as we've talked about as well before, motivation comes after you start. So you kind of have to force yourself up off the floor and just start. Then you're going to start to have the foundation, because as much as burnout is a slow, gradual process, it's not something that happens immediately. It's a prolonged exposure. Your healing journey as well isn't going to happen overnight. It's not as simple as, oh, I'm going to take a weekend off and everything's going to be fine.
Yeah, that whole concept of like, you just need to rest. And it's like, well, no, it's bigger than that. And yes, you have to make it a priority to shift your agenda or your routine or the pace at which that's going. But what you said was such a great place to start, is like, get back to your foundational routine, because then you can decide what you're going to then put on your plate. It's kind of like clearing your plate as much as you can. And if you're like, I can't clear my plate, that's not an option, which we get, because Chrissy, you were there last week and I was there a couple of weeks ago, where you're just like, that's not an option. You ask for support and you ask for help and you let people know where they can help you, and you be as clear as possible and honest as possible. Mm-hmm. Because that's the other thing, is like, people can't guess where they can show up for you. And it's a really vulnerable thing. And even giving the language to your partner or to your friends or to your family of how you guys can communicate that during the time. Even if it's just a matter of, how can I support you? How can I support you today? How can I support you this week? Because that can even look different. The day today, I might need just this for support. I might need a half an hour where everything is covered in the afternoon. Just that be a half hour. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you have kids or whatever it is, you can ask your partner, I just need a half an hour to go for a walk, to breathe and clear my head without any other people, noise, energy in and around me outside of just like the outdoors. This week, I really just need the dishes. Or I really just need bedtime routine covered, or I just need to have alone time. Like, I know about 6 months ago, I could just feel this because Dave works from home now. I'm used to having the home, to myself at least 3 hours a day. Prior, that no longer exists. I have another human being in my space at all times, unless I proactively take myself somewhere. And it usually has to be outdoors because it's the only place I can get away. I needed more than a forest walk. So I booked myself into a hotel for a night. And it was one of those things where it wasn't this vast change, but at least it was a big drop in the bucket because I just needed to have a room, a space where nobody else's energy was involved as much as possible. And so it's getting really clear. And I remember telling that story to, I think it was my mom, and she was like, well, how'd Dave feel about that? I was like, what do you mean? How did he feel about that? He was like, sure, great, fine. And it was like one of those things where I know her generation was more in and around of like, don't say your needs or, that's selfish. Don't be too upfront about, because, like, how did that make Dave feel saying you didn't want to be around him? And it was like, well, Dave knows that I like him a lot. So it wasn't about him, had nothing to do with him. It was about what I needed to be healthy. And so of course he's gonna, and if that person doesn't understand, maybe there's more conversations to be had, kind of thing. But you really can just say what you need. And at the end of the day, you can't be so worried about because that has more of a reflection on that person than does you. If you say your needs and they don't respond in the way that you needed them to. And that can happen, but it is worth always saying what you need. And the more you say what you need, the more clear you become on what it is that you need.
That's a powerful statement right there. That's exactly it. And to your point, the culture has not only changed on what we can offer each other whether you're in a partnership or asking for a friend, exactly that. I think we are at this point that you can be clear. And if you aren't received on that end, that's another something to look at. But not only has our culture changed in that facet where, because I know my mom, same thing, would be in the traditional background being like, wasn't he offended? And you're like, no, this is what I needed in that moment. But in addition to that, their generation was so different in the fact that family values were still protected in a sense. I don't have children, to be honest. I don't intend on having children, but I know in regards to friends that are parents, there's so many expectations on what that family looks like, especially now where you have parents working at home while raising their children and doing the things and the homework in the house. And it's impossible. And we have a society where it's no longer take a village and everyone's there to help you out. The expectation is, in a lot of ways, this burnout culture, because simultaneously, because we've now seen two economical crises in a very short span of time, the expectation is more for the same or less. Our investment versus reward is getting so skewed, and we're investing oftentimes in things that aren't serving us. All those values, all those moments to get out in the forest, take the walk, do the things. Instead, we're kind of addicted to this busy, which again, let's banish busy, this go, to the point that no wonder you add in what all of us have been experiencing over the last 2 years in regards to the pandemic and all those life shifts. No wonder we have this major mental health crisis on our hands. And again, I think Lori and I timed this episode specifically around the holidays for two facets. I think it was a byproduct of what both of us have experienced in recent times, both personal and career-wise. And in addition to that, we are in the holidays where I think many people put even more pressure to perform. Now we're adding in all the events and all the other things that really most of the time we should be enjoying. But some of us are so burnt out. You're going to find a lack of enjoyment in regular life things if you've already reached that point of burnout.
And all the things that we plan on doing this Christmas, every day ask yourself, is this actually going to fill your tank or deplete your tank? Like, I was really, really tired yesterday, really exhausted. And we had our gingerbread making night at old Chrissy Bum's. And there's like, yeah, I lost really bad. That depleted my tank. But what filled my tank to the top was, but when we before I was leaving, I did a check-in and I was like, are you doing this just because you're like, of course I want to hang out with my friends. Of course, this is going to be a good night. Of course, I don't want to miss this and da da da. And I had to actually check of like, is this what you need right now? Or is it going and having a hot bath and reading whatever that looked like? And I had this feeling of like, no, 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 more than ever right now, you need community and you need to have this like really, celebratory, enjoyable, chill, laughing night. And okay, great. So I was able to, comfortably take myself and we had the best night. It was just like I was just beaming ear to ear when I came back and I had so much energy today. I give full credit because of last night. But how many other nights, Christy, that I've bailed and I've said, I need just to have a hot bath, when I was really depleted and exhausted and we had like our friends were going to watch like the movie Beetlejuice night, and I was just like, I know that in so many ways, this is going to be great and da, da, da. But like what I need right now is a hot bath like that. And you just pull the cord. So you got to ask yourself of like, what do I need right now? Is this going to help fill me up or is this going to be something that's just more depleting, but I feel like I should go because on paper, it looks like the most enjoyable thing. And also, is it one of those things that you feel like you're curdling into yourself where we talk that emotional withdrawal and you say to yourself, should I do that tonight? And you're like, oh, I don't want to because I don't want to this and this and that. Are you doing that because you're emotionally withdrawing because you have overwhelm and community could be the thing that kind of blooms you back open?
It's really a testament to the community and the people that you keep in your circle because any of those instances, because I think we're quite clear with each other as a collective group.
Yes,
no
we
one's
are.
thinking, oh, can you believe that they didn't show up or that they came and that all of this is going on? People are like, this is where I'm at and this is where I'm feeling. And everyone's like, okay. And then they check in on you after. And there's so
100%.
much value in that. And that's where I was like, the biggest game changer is literally communicating with your loved ones where you're at, because some people are very expressive and it's easy for them to do that. Someone like myself, it's always been more challenging when I need to be the one that's, hey, waving the flag, I'm having a bit of a go. It's often harder for me to communicate that, but it's a way more powerful move for yourself and honestly your community as well, because if you're not clear, they're not going to understand why all of a sudden you're withdrawing or not doing this. And you're going to get the support that you really need in that moment. Now more than ever, we need to get honest with each other. And considering what we've all been going through, there is no better time. If you're somebody that's ever struggled with getting clear, try it on for size, because we learned very quickly how the world looks one day may not be how it looks the next. Life can change on a dime. So the time to get really real about where you're at, what you want, what you desire, what you're working towards, what you want to be, what you want your life to look like. This is the time to get really clear and check in with yourself, because if you don't check in and you don't get really honest, you may end up like myself on this path of burning themselves out without even realizing where you're headed. You got to check in.
Yeah. And the consequences are just not worth it, externally, internally, to check a bunch of boxes off. Even the ones that you feel as though you really have no choice, you might have to do all the things that are on that list of to-dos. So even more so, create a plan of like, who is in your corner, who is your support team, who is your community, what are your go-tos of what are your go-tos that you're going to release that energy around those stressors? Because again, you're going to have that clogged in your body and that is going to create disease, disorder. It's going to come out in your interactions in everywhere. It just literally seeps, like we spoke to, like the virus, So, well, that just leads us right into our little motivation maintenance. I feel like
motivation maintenance.
Motivation maintenance.
I'll start off here because mine is not original, but it is by far the most helpful thing that gave me the awareness. And it's basically one that I know that we've said in others, but literally now more than ever, journal your life. Check in with a journal. Try and make it relatively frequent, because I'll tell you what happened. For me to realize where I was at, and the fact that as someone that tries to pride themselves to not write the same story over and over in life, that's literally a life goal for me. All of a sudden realized I was repeating the same narrative in my brain that was becoming a negative narrative. The way I was able to have my huge aha moment was reading my journal. I read it back from March 2020 onward, and I realized that I was not only writing the same issues that hadn't been properly communicated or addressed, but all of a sudden the little mountain was getting bigger and bigger. And from one week to the next, I wasn't noticing it. When you read through and saw that cumulatively, it became very clear of where I was at, what needed to change, what my why was in regards to how I wanted to change it, and all of that. So literally the best way to check in and document, because every day is a new day. It's going to look the same. And if you are addicted to busy, you may not be checking in with yourself mentally as much as you should. So get it on paper, because that reflection, that tool of reflection is invaluable. Because once you're aware, that's when you can start healing. That's when you can start addressing in your life how you can adjust things to work better. Because at the end of the day, burnout's not going to fix itself if you've gotten it there. You need to take actionable steps.
Fantastic. I like that. So mine's a bit of a 2. I think, yeah, technically it's kind of 2. I'm going to sneak another one.
Well, I'm too busy for 2. No.
I don't have time. I'm burnt out. So the first one is like physical, get that energy out. So write down 2 things that you know, that whether it's like dancing, mine's, like I said, beating the crap out of a pillow, choose 2 things that you can do like on the fly, wherever you are. I have to have a bed if I'm going to beat the pillow. But I also have things like shadow boxing is a really good. So if I'm at somewhere that has a bathroom, I'm not going to do this in front of somebody, somewhere that I can take immediate action. And when you feel yourself irritable, or you're in a stressor that you can't exactly move through the full cycle, which is essentially taking action and completing whatever stressors, so that you can leave that behind. When you feel that feeling come up, before you do it, scale of 1 to 10, how agitated or stressed you feel. You might be like, I'm an 8. Go do that thing that you wrote down or you've made a note of. So go shadow box, go beat the thing, whatever, just let loose. And then do a scale of 1 to 10. How do you feel? So you have something that you can gauge right then and there, how much that it worked. Even if you're just like, oh, I just feel that release, like something's released. The stressor still might be there. You still have that thing you got to get done, or the thing that, is still going to be causing you to, be depleted, or whatever that looks like. But it's just releasing that valve just enough so you don't combust, so that you're still gripping the road. You still got some tread on that tire. And the other one is that every night before bed, ask yourself, this is out of positive psychology, ask yourself, what worked today? What went well today? And it can be the most simplest of things of like, I emptied the dishwasher, once the dishes were clean and I didn't have, dirty dishes in the sink. I'm saying that because that's literally mine today. So with something that is what worked well today, and then why did it work? Because so much of that feels like we are on this treadmill of life's demands. And so when you anchor yourself at the end of the day, we talked about how this is similar to the gratitude, but it is different enough. It's around the psychology around seeing what is working, because it can at times feel like so much isn't working in our lives. And so it's really important to tether yourself to that. And why did it work? Well, because I made a point of going to the dishwasher at this time, and while I still had energy enough, and I prioritized whatever that looks like. So scale of 1 to 10, have a plan of moving that body, gauge it afterwards. How do you feel? Great. That worked. Put in your back pocket for next time, release the valve. What's working today? Why is it working? Boom, shittle, boom, boom, bang.
I love the what's working today. That one is a lifesaver if at the end of the day. It helps avoid you feeling defeated too, because often when you are in that
Absolutely.
mindset in the thick of it, that's where you start to think, well, I'm so overwhelmed, nothing's going right. It's a great way to avoid digging in your heels into that story, because we tend to believe the stories we tell ourselves, and what the mind sees, the mind believes. So
Good Lord.
my quote today is from an easy to say name, David Allen. You can do anything, but not everything. And I will add to that and say, and that is absolutely okay to realize that.
Yes, it is. This is from Michael Gungor. Burnout is what happens when you try to avoid being human for too long.
And that, my friends, is the motivation.
You've just listened to the Motivation Podcast with your host, Chrissy Van, and me, Laura Joy Kingwell.
Thanks for joining us along the ride. We've got new episodes dropping every Monday, and we're all about community. So follow us on Instagram at Motivation Podcast and visit our website at themotivation.com.
And in the meantime, tanks full and full throttle.